Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our UH2U webinar this evening about a little thing called the election. We're so glad you all are joining us here this evening on our UH2U webinar series brought to you by your University of Houston Alumni Association. My name is Mike Padey. I'm class of 1989. I'm your AVP of Alumni Relations, and we have a show for you this evening with some very special guests and a very hot topic. As you know, the election started today. Lines are forming. People are wanting to get out there and vote, vote, vote. And we certainly encourage you all to do the same. We're going to try and provide you with some very vital information today, but a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar, and you will be able to look at it or pass it along to your friends afterwards by going to our website at houstonalumni.com/webinar. So please be sure to share that after we are through. You'll also receive a thank you for participating today with potentially a short survey to give us your feedback on this webinar and maybe some others you would like to see. A couple of notes coming up for some future webinars that we have to mark your calendars with. On Wednesday, November 11th at 6 o'clock, we'll be taking a trip down memory lane during homecoming this year, as we have a bunch of great former University of Houston Cougar athletes, both men and women in all sports: Wade Phillips, Woody Williams, Jolanda Jones, Billy Ray Brown, Alois Blackwell, an incredible panel hosted by Eric Barajas. That is on November 11th. And we will also have another big event coming up on Wednesday, October 28th at 10 a.m. Our President Renu Khator's fall address this year streamed to the world, so you'll be able to see that. A couple other housekeeping notes at the end. We will be having some Q&A at the end of our program today, so stay on to hear the questions that were put into us in advance, and we've taken those and worked our way through for our panel. And then, of course, our upcoming webinar. So as I mentioned, I'm going to introduce our first guest to get us started today. And of course, she is well into her second decade at the helm of the University of Houston as our president, and has just completed the largest campaign, fundraising campaign in the history of the University of Houston. And if you'll allow me to introduce to you our president, Dr. Renu Khator.
Well, thank you, Mike, and good evening, everyone. I see over 90 of you have joined. I'm very proud to present to you today. Very special program from the Department of Political Science. That is my home department. That's where my degree is, and I'm very proud of the department, the work they do, and the wisdom they provide to me personally, but also all the conversations and dialogues that they have. Very proud of the college as well, where our Department of Political Science is housed, College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. And of course, it's a blessing to be at the university. This program, I know, is being co-sponsored by Houston Public Media as well as the University of Houston Alumni Association. So thanks to all of them. I don't want to take too much of your time. If you are interested in finding out what's going on with the university, how we dealt with COVID-19, what we are going to do, what's our way forward, join me during my fall address on October 28th till that time. And today, let's hear the very important conversation on elections. So thank you all again for joining. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, President Khator. And again, the date for the president's fall address is Wednesday, October 28th at 10 a.m. You can find all the information you need on that at UH2U or on our website at houstonalumni.com. So before I get to our first introduction, today was early voting started. And once again, UH will be hosting early and election day voting locations for all registered voters in Harris County. Early voting will be held at the UH Student Center through October 30th, while election day voting this year will be held at TD-ECU Stadium in the club level. So voting in style. For early voting, park in the Welcome Center or the Hilton Garage across the street from the Student Center, and you'll receive a parking voucher inside the polling location. And for Election Day voting, free parking is available at Lot 12A on the corner of Wheeler and Scott Street. So to get us started today is the Interim Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences and a Professor of Health and Human Performance, a past President of the university's Faculty Senate. He received his PhD in kinesiology from the University of Houston in 2002. Let me introduce to you Dr. Dan O'Connor.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome to everyone. I'll just give a short overview of the college because I know we need to get to our program and then introduce our panel. In the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, we study people, how people relate to one another, how they form larger groups, and how those groups function, interact, and communicate with each other. So we study humans, history, society, culture, economics, languages, values, and of course, politics. By using rigorous methods, reasoning, and civil discourse, we learn how to include, understand, and respect diverse voices and perspectives. And I believe those are exactly the skills and types of conversations that are needed today to solve society's greatest challenges. And we're passing those tools to skills to new generations of tomorrow's leaders every day in our classes, in our labs. We're here tonight for analysis of the upcoming election. The UN has identified democracy as one of their 17 global priorities, stating that democracy provides an environment for the protection and effective realization of human rights. Voting is a basic principle of democracy, and free and fair elections is one of its defining features. I trust that you will find the discussion tonight to be a good example of how institutions of higher learning contribute to knowledge and understanding that serves the community and the public. So let me introduce our participants. Dr. Jeff Church is the Department Chair of Political Science and is serving as moderator for this event. He studies how philosophies of freedom, individuality, education, and culture inform contemporary liberal and democratic theory. Our panelists are Dr. Brandon Rottinghouse and Dr. Geronimo Cortina, both with the Department of Political Science, and who you may recognize as the co-hosts of the weekly Party Politics podcast on Houston Public Media. Dr. Rottinghouse is an expert on the presidency and Texas politics. Dr. Cortina specializes in survey research, immigration, and quantitative methods. He is also the Associate Director at the Center for Mexican American Studies and a bit of a politician himself. He's currently serving as the U of H Faculty Senate President. Dr. Church, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dean O'Connor. I appreciate it. And it's great to be with you, Geronimo and Brandon. I wanted to start with the obvious question to begin, which is to start with the presidential race. There are other elections going on, but the presidential race is what most are talking about. I wanted to start by asking you just to give us your analysis of the state of the race. We've been hearing that from a number of places that Trump is down, Biden is up. I just looked at the betting odds. The betting odds are 66% in favor of Biden, 34% for Trump. Maybe give us your perspective to begin.
Well, I don't have department chair money like you do, so I'm not going to put my own money on it, but I'll put your money on it. And I believe what you say. I definitely think that Biden is surging. There's definitely momentum in places where he needs to win. So Pennsylvania is going to be key. Wisconsin is going to be key. Florida is going to be key. The polling has got Biden up between 3% and 5% there. So in terms of like the electoral college math that he needs to work, he's probably in pretty good shape. But, you know, hashtag 2020, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Who's going to show up, you know, what the effect of some of these last minute voter changes is going to do to turnout. We're having long lines all over Texas, in part because we've changed the ballot. There's no longer a straight ticket option, and you've got a consolidation of polling places in a bunch of different counties in Texas. So there's a lot of big question marks that are out there, but I do think that Biden is in good shape to win the presidency. And by that, I mean winning not only the popular vote, which he definitely will win, but also the electoral college vote, which is clearly the thing that puts him into power. Geronimo, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to the UH Alumni Association and also to Houston Public Media, our home for the Party Politics podcast. And of course, thank you, Jeff, for inviting us, and Dean O'Connor and President Couture. Thank you very much also for all your support. Well, I think, you know, when you're looking at the presidential election and you start playing with the numbers and the electoral college, that is fascinating, I guess, democratic phenomenon that only happens.
Democratic, right?
That only happens with small d in the U.S. We see that, you know, the key states that are at play, you know, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan to a certain extent, Florida and Colorado represent a very weird mix of voters, right? When you're looking at, you know, under the hood in terms of how voters can go one way or the other, we have seen it in previous presidential elections. We have Florida as the toss-up state, then it became Republican, then Colorado the same. Now Texas is at play, and also, you know, to a certain extent, Arizona, Michigan. I'm sorry, Minnesota, Georgia, North Carolina, and Ohio. So you have a very weird mix of states that are at play, and that obviously give to the winner of those states, of the popular vote in those states, all the electoral votes. So it's going to be super interesting. We have seen so far that turnout in Texas, and we just saw it today in Harris County, blew off the charts. And I don't think that that is going to stop anytime soon until November 3rd. And November 3rd, the people that didn't vote earlier are going to go and wait in line for a long, long, long time, which is a good, measure of how well, democracy is playing out.
We get to talk about another thing, I guess, that's been in the news, which is the reliability of polling, right? This is something that in 2016 got political scientists like us in hot water, right, for our inability to predict. Everyone saw the.
Well, I mean, we had it right.
Yeah, you're a political
right.
theory.
Well, this is right. This is what we tell ourselves. Okay. Well, let me turn it over to you and tell us about how reliable are the polls that we've been hearing.
They're reliable to the extent to which you can see the inputs effectively creating a good output. So it's like a recipe, right? If you use bad ingredients, it's going to turn out badly, right? It's like how people tell you to use, low quality wine for cooking. Don't do that. Use good quality wine for everything, right? If you have a good sample, if you organize it in a way that gets you what you want, what you're looking for, you ask good questions, there are lots of ways to get good, reliable outcomes. But as you say, there was a time where pollsters had it wrong in a bunch of states. Partly it was because I think they weren't really kind of totally sure how to deal with what we call partisan non-response bias. And that is basically where people kind of hide their political opinions because they are seen to be either kind of, too off the wall, or there's hiding their support for Donald Trump, who sometimes says and does things people don't like or otherwise wouldn't agree with. So there's a lot of that happening. We're a little better than Geronimo, which is, need to talk about this too, because we've done some polling with Univision and the Center for Mexican-American Studies where, we're really careful to try to get a good sample, and it takes time. I mean, there's no way around it. So there's lots of ways to do it. And the 538 rates pollsters, so there's a way to be able to see how good the outcome for pollsters are, so we can at least get a sense of a good win-loss record, unlike pundits who, when we're wrong, we just kind of forget. But I'm wrong a lot, so I'm willing to admit it, right?
Right. Well, I mean, just to piggyback on that answer, I think that, it's just very important to look at, as Brandon was saying, to look to the ingredient list. And that is the margin of error and things that we need to take into consideration. If a poll has a margin of error of 6 to 7%, it's just simply stay away from it, right? Don't even read it, because anything could be completely wrong. Most polls are, within 3 to 4 percentage points in terms of margin of error. And for example, in Texas, that's what is happening, right? A recent poll by Morning Consult of 3,500 voters in Texas suggests that, President Trump is winning the state by only 2 percentage points, which means that it's within the margin of error. So that means that Texas is becoming more and more competitive. And when you look at polls, if polls are completely divergent in terms of their findings, there is something completely wrong in terms of how you are conducting the sampling frame. And the sampling frame is basically who are you going to include in your poll so they can ask you those questions. So you have to have a sample not only of the general population in terms of demographics, but more importantly in terms of the voter roll and who's going to be likely and not likely to go out and vote.
Yeah, so just to follow up on this, I mean, what about the so-called shy Trump voter or closet Trump voter? Sometimes the phenomenon that is that sometimes in a poll setting, poll participants might not feel totally confident revealing their actual preferences. Is there a way that you've found that we're able to address that issue?
I think that was an issue, and I'll let Brandon pitch in just a second, but I think that was an issue in 2016, right? I think that was an issue in 2016, but 2016 till 2020, everything has changed. The way that we do politics, the way that President Trump has changed dramatically the political game. And you can see it, right? In 2016, you didn't see a lot of people, manifesting openly their political preferences. And now, people go to Lake Travis, right, to have a boat parade and not be shy about it. So in terms of the context, that has changed dramatically. So I think that now people are more open, which is a good thing for pollsters like us. It's a very good thing in order to know that there's going to be, first of all, those shy voters, whether it's Vice President Biden or President Trump supporters, are going to be openly identifying themselves as one or the other.
Yeah, like, if you don't respond to a pollster's question about whether you favor President Trump's approval, handling of his job, but you're going to go to Lake Travis and sail your boat with a big old "Make America Great Again" flag. I mean, there is that happening. I think the real way to solve it is just more questions. I mean, the more you kind of probe people's opinions on things, the better you get a sense of where they really stand. So it really is just a kind of question of being careful and kind of being thorough about that whole process. But it takes time and money to do that. And sometimes pollsters don't take the time and effort to do it. So that's why you see this variation. And just one last thing to note is that, any one poll is just a snapshot of what we're seeing at that moment. And it could change, like if you had a sample that extended for 2 days before or 2 days after. So they're all just snapshots. So the best thing to do is look at averaging of polling, and that gives you a better kind of clear sense of where things are right now. For instance, looking at the polling averages for Trump and for Biden in Texas, the numbers have solidified to some degree so that the weighted moving average basically has Trump ahead by between 3 and 4%. So that's probably about where things ought to be given the dynamics of the race so far. Now things can change, of course, because they always do in 2020, but that's sort of the way to think of it, is just, think of it as one piece of a larger kind of moving puzzle.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of move from the sort of aggregate overall picture to sort of dig into some of the groups of voters. I wanted to get into this way. I mean, thinking about the effect of COVID on the race. Particularly, I'm thinking about a group of seniors as voters. I mean, seniors are typically, traditionally vote Republican and vote reliably. But in the year of COVID, in which a year in which seniors have been hit the hardest from this terrible disease, is this something that senior voters are going to defect from the Republican Party, defect from Trump?
Well, I think that the answer to that is yes, right? And we have seen some movement. There have been some polls, even our own poll asked if people who have been affected by COVID, how likely they are that they're going to support Vice President Biden. And they are 4 times more likely if they have been affected directly or, a family member by COVID to vote for Biden. So there is a huge turnoff effect in terms of that. Before COVID, President Trump was not doing very well, especially here in Texas, especially in the suburbs. President Trump, the rhetoric that he was pitching, it didn't fall very well among Texas voters. Now the pandemic, yes, I think COVID is going to be something that is going to turn around this election, and particularly around senior citizens, regardless of their political preferences. Why? Because, voting has become a little bit more complicated to a certain extent. We understand that there is some laws, so on and so forth. And, the governor has, on the one hand, extended early voting, but on the other one, having other measures that, especially certain type of voters can see it as inconvenient. And that has a particular effect on how they're going to react when they are, basically selecting who they're going to vote.
I mean, Trump has been losing support in Texas since he started campaigning, and it's predominantly a suburban affair, as Geronimo says. But the state is really different than it was 4 years ago, you've got, and even 6 years ago, you've got literally millions of new voters. So about 3 million new voters since John Cornyn first, was reelected last time. So there's a whole new kind of political world out there, and Trump has been not playing that well in it. And so the support he's been getting has been slowly kind of, bleeding off. As for seniors, there's part of that. I mean, the fact that he's not been strong on healthcare or on entitlement issues, that's been a real kind of blow to Republican Party brand in Texas, but also for President Trump specifically. And COVID just exacerbates all of this. I mean, a lot of the election aftermath will be blamed on COVID, but the reality is that a lot of these trends were baked in before COVID ever started. But one thing we do know from looking at the data is that and our colleagues at the George Washington University did a cool analysis that looked at what happens in a specific precinct when there are more COVID cases in terms of political support. And what they found was that if you have an increase of like 100 cases, then there's increasing support for Joe Biden and the Democrats. So there's a real clear metric that the worse the COVID cases are in a particular location, the more likely they are to support the Democrats. And in a way, you'd expect this to be sort of good news because we can predict, what's going to happen. In a way, we can't predict the economy anymore. And so this is a weird scenario where now everything is partisan, even the economy. When you ask people questions about like how well the economy is doing, they'll respond either it's good or it's bad based upon who is in power, like which president's in power. So that's not helpful in a democracy where we assume that like there should be retrospective voting. People look back and say, the president did a good job or not. Now that doesn't exist in the same way that it used to. So in polarized times, it's really hard to kind of find these clear answers. But at least for COVID, like I said, there's a fairly clear direct evidence that like more COVID cases or worse handling of COVID has a negative effect on the president.
I know the two of you have been working on polling with regard to Latina voters. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what you've learned about that voting population and what to look for as we approach the election with that population.
Right. So first of all, we started this project last year, and then did some polling with Univision, our department, and then CIMAS. And basically what we found is that the level or the likelihood of, or the chances that people will participate, that Latinos are going to go and vote is, increasing every single time that we poll. Just to give you an idea, around 78% of Latinos in a national poll that we did say that they will certainly vote. And then when you go to Texas, that number decreases a little bit to 76%. But among age groups, young Latinos, 18 to 29, are 68%. 68% say that they likely are going to vote, and we have never seen those numbers in our entire history of polling. We have never seen that enthusiasm. I mean, obviously, everything can be wrong, and then certainly decide not to go out and vote. But we have never seen those numbers. And we have seen, for example, people 50 plus are saying that they're going to vote at 85%. And those levels are comparable to other demographics. So it shows to a certain extent how the Latino electorate has matured over time, not only at the national level, but also here in Texas. And then on the other hand, you see these big influx of young Latino voters that have been registered in the past years. When you look, for example, at the percentage of registered voters at the precinct level, you see, a normal trend from 2012 to 2016. But then after 2016, in anticipation of the 2018, you see a huge dramatic increase of Latinos getting registered to vote. And as they say, once you vote once, you never stop. So if they voted in 2018 and they are enthusiastic about participating in this election, I think that we're going to see that very, very, very likely. And also, we found, or there is, a 41-point difference between support for Vice President Biden and President Trump. We see that Latinos are voting 65%, 64% to 25% of supporting President Trump. And we see, which is also very interesting, a very small percentage of Latinos that are indecisive until, when we did that poll last week or so. Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a hugely consequential election for the Latinx community. This is going to be, I think, the time we're going to see the vote share rise above 30%, right? We've seen this pretty low. From about 2000 or so, it was about 20% of the electorate, even though what percentage of the population in Texas is the Latino community, Geronimo, 45% or 50%, right? So like those numbers don't always add up to voting power, but I think this election we're going to see that. And one of the things we found is that it's really the issues that are changing the dynamics of the political scene for the Latinx community. So routinely, Republicans in Texas were getting 30 to 35, sometimes 40% of the Latino vote. That's not going to happen anymore. And although the Latino vote's not a monolith, the fact that there's this big wedge, especially with respect to racial issues, is going to be a real consequence for Republicans who can't run up the score on Democrats anymore the way they did from 2000 all the way to the present. So those changes are really going to be important. And the issues we see that Latinos care about that Democrats are really trumpeting are issues like healthcare, jobs in the economy, and gun control, especially as it relates to kind of racial issues. The big break moment for them was when the El Paso shooting took place. This was a year ago, it seems. It's hard to believe all this time has passed, but a year ago, some individual who drove from North Texas to El Paso shot a bunch of people in a Walmart there and was motivated by the kind of, racial divide in the country. And the Latino community, when we polled them, were extremely upset about this and saw the rhetoric coming out of the White House as being cause of it. So those changes are really going to manifest for Democrats and take root for years to come. So like Geronimo says, this is a community that's very young, they're very urban, and we're going to see that growth, and they're going to grow along with the Democratic Party. So this is really, Donald Trump has changed the politics of the country in so many ways, but it will forever have changed the politics of Texas.
Well, and in addition, if you look at, the big triangle that is, the Dallas Metroplex area, and then Austin, San Antonio, New Braunfels, and then our region, the Houston metropolitan area, you see that that's where the population growth is happening, right? You see East Texas, North Texas being depopulated simply by, demographic change, but also people, young people moving to big urban centers. And that population growth is attributed to Latinos. So by 2022, Latinos are going to be the biggest majority demographic group in the state. And that, by simple analogy, changes the whole political dynamic of the state. So if political parties, both Republicans and Democrats, don't start paying attention, right, particular attention to these demographic, especially to these electorate that, as Brandon says, is not monolithic, then they're going to have very, 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 very problematic elections in the near future.
Geronimo was just mad he's stuck in traffic all the time, right? With all these new Texans, right? And the state's booming, right? I mean, we saw the numbers come out in terms of registration, right? The state has added almost 2 million voters since 2016. So in 4 years of growth basically, and of kind of natural, sort of movement to being of an adulthood or voting age, the state's really remade itself. So it's a tremendous time to study Texas politics because there's so many different things working and moving all at once.
Yeah, so I wanted to turn it around to the campaigns of Biden and Trump to see what it is that the strategy is behind those campaigns and speaking to these different groups. It's been a kind of unusual campaign for both parties. I guess I suppose it's fair to say. For those of all of us who watched the first debate, as the first and only presidential debate thus far, it's remarkably bereft of much policy discussion. And I was wondering to get both your takes on, maybe you could characterize for us what you take to be the main overarching Biden campaign strategy and the main overarching Trump campaign strategy at this moment.
Right. So I think that, since the beginning and, since the nomination process, we knew that this election, once again, is not about ideology. It's not about policies. It's not about, should we increase or decrease this rate or the environment or anything like that, because that's already a given. That has been given at the start of this election campaign. So it is very hard, well, not hard, but it's already pretty well defined. And also this issue of political polarization, right? Everyone is polarized. So, as Brandon was saying, I mean, I can tell you that the economy is great, right? But if you're a Democrat, you're going to say, no, that's a lie. And just even if I show you, numbers or whatnot, and the opposite is true, right? In terms of the environment, if a Democrat talks to a Republican sympathizer and says, well, this administration is destroying the environment, it's going to say, no, it's not true, right? Even though that one side or the other may have actual facts. So the issue here is that I think that both campaigns, and we saw it since the national conventions, were basically trying to get the base riled up and see how many troops they can rally for the big final day. The Democrats use a different strategy at the beginning, a little bit more of extending their hand to those voters that were not decided during the nomination process, during the Democratic National Convention. But the Republican National Convention said, like, forget about it. We're not going to convince anyone. We better get our troops ready to go and vote for us on election day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the Trump campaign has a strategy. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. And that's not I don't mean that to sound partisan, but the way that they've distributed the money to the places where the sort of troops on the ground are working hard, the places the president has gone or not gone, it's all been very confusing. So I'm not sure that they have an overarching strategy. They may not need one, right? I mean, 2016 showed us that the president's going to get free airtime on everything he says and does. So why spend money and advertise when realistically, like, you're going to get the coverage you need? And as Geronimo says, if it's a base election, then the base is going to lap up whatever you put out anyway. So I think for the president, for Trump, holding the Republican line is key. That's becoming harder and harder to do, especially in a time where COVID is, gripped so many different cities and too many different states. So I think that's a real problem for them. And I don't think they've adjusted their strategy to accommodate for that. On the Biden side, I think that they've been trying to be very careful about winning back states that Clinton lost in 2016. This was sort of the mantra, I think, if anything, of what the Biden campaign's trying to do. They're doing so in a very targeted way, though, a very selective way. I mean, COVID obviously makes it hard for them to campaign in the way that they would, but they definitely have invested more time in targeting certain key places that they think that they've got to win. So Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Wisconsin, places Democrats routinely won now can't be counted on. So Biden's got to be able to put some face time in there. So those are really, I think that's a kind of cornerstone of the strategy. And the rest of the strategy is like, let's just see how the money can move votes, and let's see how unpopular Trump is. So those two things together are helping them win places like Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, maybe Texas. Jill Biden is here. I guess she's here now. I'm not sure where she is exactly, but she was in El Paso and she was going to San Antonio, I think, and maybe Dallas. So there's a kind of let's just see how this works sort of effect from the Biden camp to say, if maybe Trump is as unpopular as we think and he's hemorrhaging Republican votes, maybe they can pick up a few. So it's there's a kind of fundamental strategy that they're playing with, but there's also, maybe a kind of swing for the fences if they get the right pitch.
Yeah, I didn't check the betting odds on turning Texas blue. Either of you willing to put money down on that one?
No. I'll put your money down on it, but I'm not gonna put my money. I'll put Geronimo's money down.
I don't have any money, so yeah, no, I don't bet.
You don't bet. No, we're rooted in firmly in the data. But I mean, even if that, like, it's a tough sell. I mean, so obviously the Biden campaign poured a good chunk of money into Texas. It's a very targeted dump, and so the goal is to be able to rise support in places like Bexar and El Paso, where there's been a tremendous surge in turnout. If you look at the turnout from 2000, the El Paso and Travis and Bexar counties are among the highest increases in turnout, period. And those are all very blue counties and areas. So the Biden campaign is, I think, savvily, in a savvy way, sort of spending that money. But it's so expensive to run in Texas. To run an effective campaign, it's going to cost you millions of dollars a week, and a couple $1 million isn't going to get the job done. It might help down ballot candidates, but it's unlikely to help at the top of the ticket in a significant way.
Mike, I was going to pivot to the Senate races and the down ballot races. It might be a good time, though, to take some question and answer if you'd like.
Sure, absolutely. And you guys should have a radio show or something. You're really quite good at it.
We're thinking about it. Yeah, we're thinking about it.
Anyway, yeah, we do have some questions that were sent in beforehand, and we have one that came, and I'll try and pick a few of these because there's so many really good ones. So how about this one? What will the impact of the elimination of straight ticket voting have on down ballot races this time around?
I'll field that one because I've done some academic research on that.
Right.
The short answer, let me just humble brag on my paper, my working paper. Basically, it's going to hurt down ballot Democrats more than it hurts down ballot Republicans, but it hurts them both. It actually hurts incumbents. So incumbents like Angie Chen Button and Morgan Meyer in Dallas, they're likely to be hurt because they had counted on a reservoir of Republican support, and it won't be there anymore, at least as baked in through straight ticket voting. The same is true, though, for some Democrats in the west side of Houston. Gina Canali is one, and John Rosenthal. They won their races by slim margins. So at least in principle, what I find is that there's going to be about a 2 to 3% drop for support for Democrats down ballot. And in these races that are decided by less than 5%, that's going to be pretty significant. So that's to say nothing of what will happen like way down ballot, like the judicial races. That's also going to have a serious effect, and it's going to hurt Democrats too. And that's been statistically shown in other ways. But the real effect, though, I think for most people is just going to be longer lines, because now it takes a long time to complete a very long ballot. So the reason we're seeing these long lines is not just because the polling places aren't put where they should be, although that's to some degree true in other counties. I think Harris did a good job, but the long lines exist because people are taking more time to fill out their ballot. So in a way it's good, but obviously it has negative consequences.
Well, I mean, and something that I've seen in terms of waiting time and how it's going to hurt. And today my unscientific drive around polling places to see if I found one not crowded enough for me to vote. I saw a lot of people already holding pieces of paper that I assume were their pre-print ballots. So there it seems to be, at least, and we're going to find out this later when the Harris County or the Secretary of State they report the data when they enter the time that it takes a voter to vote, basically, right? So through some modeling, we can estimate if people are getting to the polls a little bit more prepared in terms of having that, pre-printed ballot. So if that's a pre-printed ballot, it will take you 5 to 6 minutes or less to go through the whole list. If you go completely unprepared, it's going to take you around 15 to 20 minutes to go from top to bottom. In Texas, we have more than 956 races across the state, meaning, from the president to judicial races, but also a lot of propositions in a lot of counties. So that takes a while, and reading each proposition can take you at least 3 or 5 minutes, and to understand it, it can take you a lifetime.
Right, it's democracy in action, right? I'll say this too, and this is a way to brag on some of our undergraduates. 3 of them and I, through what we call the Election Lab, have been working on looking at county websites to see whether or not counties are providing information about voting. And what we find is that there's a woeful number of them that aren't providing any information about voting, and not even a full 100% of them offer a sample ballot. So only 80% of county websites offer a sample ballot. And like Geronimo said, in a year where there's going to be so many different races and so many different kind of complications, you've got to have a preparation plan in place. And a lot of counties aren't helping that. So it's going to get worse because elections are going to be competitive in Texas, hopefully forever. And I think that, that's good, but also it requires voters to do a pretty heavy lift.
Excellent. And there's a bunch of really good questions here. So I'm going to try to get a bunch. I'm going to try and tie a couple of together. So I'm going to start with 4 words that it might be Pandora's box, but mail-in vote effect. Go. Right?
Well, I mean, Brandon and I, we did an analysis of mail ballots in the primary races, right? The reasoning behind that, and people ask us, well, why you didn't take 2016? And the reason why we didn't take 2016 is because 2020 is a completely outlier of everything. So the context has changed, the type of situation has changed, polarization has changed. So the closest thing that we had was the primary a couple of months ago. And what we found is very interesting, because there is this common wisdom, flying somewhere, that, mail-in ballots actually helps a lot of Democrats. And basically what we found is that in the Democratic primary, around 9% of voters voted using the mail-in ballot. And for the Republican primary, it was only 13%. So if you want to make that argument, then, mail-in ballot helps Republican candidates on the one hand, but the differences are very small differences. And when you look at the data at the precinct level, right, there's some precincts that, that difference is not statistically significant. So it doesn't have a significant effect. So when you analyze by that, yes, we found, for example, some pockets of more participation by mail-in ballot. For example, the Bel Air area, West University Place, there was a significant concentration of people participating by mail-in ballot. But also you found that on the east side of Houston, down Pasadena, that area, you also see a significant participation of people voting by ballot. So it's something that, got traction in the media, in the rhetoric, but the data simply does not support that.
So do you think any of that possibly delays, the myth out there is it delays the terms of length and likelihood of the announcement of the presidency being on election night? What do you see there? Will that actually get slowed down?
It definitely will. I mean, as more people are voting by mail, they're going to have to count those ballots, and that's going to take time. They can start counting ballots early, but they can't count them all early. So they have to stop at some point and start counting again. So it's going to take a couple of days. And, Biden may not win the state of Texas. It may be far enough away that they call it, they know that the Trump will win. But there are a lot of down ballot races that will definitely be in jeopardy for a couple of days after, at least, maybe more, depending on how quickly the ballots are counted. So Harris County has gone through a lot of changes at the county clerk level. And although I have full confidence that they're going to do a good job, that means that they're going to take time to do a good job. So it's going to be a day or more probably until they can get good results. But that to me is a sign of a healthy process. You don't want this to be rushed. That's not the whole point here. We don't need instant answers. It's not like, putting something in your Amazon cart and having it delivered that day, right? I mean, that feels good, but that's not the way that voting works. So patience is really going to be key.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, I was actually looking here for that statistic that I had, but I cannot find it. But there was, probably Brandon.
You should just make it up. Isn't that what?
Oh, okay. It's around your hometown. This race for House, for the Texas House, that the winner won by 90 votes. So, it shows that every single vote is going to matter, right? Whether it arrives 1 or 2 days later, it's going to be extremely important. And also, the legal activity and the legal challenges are going to be unprecedented this election as well.
Now there's a whole list, if you go to their websites, they have a whole list of what their platforms are, but what are the most striking differences between the two presidential candidates?
That's a good question. They've kind of tended to meld together, like on things like healthcare and prescription drug prices. Those are top on people's minds. I know, so that that's something Democrats have won big on in 2018, maybe less big in 20, just because the Republicans saw how bad it was for them and maybe they've adjusted. Probably response to COVID is going to be the biggest one. Now, Mike Pence the other night during the vice presidential debate seemed to imply that, that Biden's plan was basically a Trump plan. I think they're going to have trouble convincing people of that. As we joked on the podcast, Mike Pence is the head of the COVID task force in the White House, and that obviously didn't go super well. So there's a lot of kind of issues there. But that's probably the biggest thing I think people see. That and just the kind of fundamentals of like how to stimulate the economy, the Green New Deal, or kind of whatever approximates the Green New Deal. Those are probably the biggest sort of divides between the parties specifically and the candidates, I think, more generally.
And to jump in here really quick, because you segued very nicely. One of our attendees right now put a question in, and he asked, why did Biden deny the Green New Deal at the first debate?
It is a real problem for Democrats to win over voters who are worried about the economy and the potential crisis of altering the way that industry is allowed to operate. That's especially true for Texas. I talked to a reporter from Bloomberg today who writes about energy issues, and part of the reason the Democrats have been distancing from the Green New Deal is that in the trade-off between stimulating the economy and protecting the environment, in tough economic times and in polarizing times, Democrats have tried to stay away from those issues. So that's generally why. And the Green New Deal is massive. I mean, the documentation, the policy proposals they're huge, right? There's hundreds of them. To embrace all of it would be a challenge and would definitely invite a pretty nasty attack ad that would sell very well in places like Florida and the Sun Belt that rely on sort of, energy as a primary component, not to mention Pennsylvania.
Jeff, I know you had a Senate question you might want to ask if you were going to tee one up. We have a few more minutes before I ask another one. I cut you off when we started. Did you have one about the Senate races?
Oh, no, well, I was going to transition because we have an important U.S. Senate race. John Cornyn is up for re-election, of course. And I mean, I guess the question to the two of you is what to look for in that race. What are the chances of the Democrat winning? And I'd like to, while we're at it, sort of transition to thinking about the Senate as a whole and what the chances are for Democrats of taking the Senate.
So, I think that in terms, the Senate race, first of all, at the national level is to a certain extent in play, right? You have Arizona, you have Colorado, you have North Carolina, Minnesota, or Michigan, Michigan, where Democrats are leading, despite some scandals in North Carolina. The candidate Cunningham is winning by around 6 percentage points. And also, traditional Republican strongholds in Georgia and South Carolina, those races are within the margin of error, right? So it's very likely that the U.S. Senate is going to flip. And part with the confirmation or the nomination confirmation or confirmation of the nomination, depending how you want to see it, is extremely important. Right, it's extremely important for Senate Republicans, right? Because they might not get a chance, and they might lose this opportunity if something completely scandalous arises. But if not, I think the confirmation is going to happen. But in Texas, speaking of Texas, I think that John Cornyn is going to win. He has an immense and very big war chest, and he has also tried to stay away from cultural war issues, right? Issues that he doesn't want to engage. He doesn't engage. And we have to remember, John Cornyn won his first election in early 2000s. And, he's kind of a traditional Texas Republican, right? What we would expect perhaps to the right of George Bush in terms of conservatism, if you want to see it that way. But it's a traditional Texas Republican that is, if ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And don't mess with very thorny issues. He tried to stay away with that. And then you have MJ Hager, that, her fundraiser has increased over the past weeks like insane. I think that they have never seen this amount of money flowing into such a campaign at the state level. But still, she is, quite behind the poll. So I don't think, but again, and here's my exit, right? It's 2020, so we don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, there's a lot mixed up in the national map, so I don't know what's going to happen. But my guess is that the Democrats will take the Senate, as Geronimo said. But there's a chance it could be a tie. And that would be interesting to see how the presidential ticket ends up winning, or how that plays out. So the vice presidential candidate is important because they could lead to a tie. So I think that the Democrats are going to lose Alabama, but obviously that was a seat that wasn't really theirs to begin with. It was kind of a fluky win for Doug Jones, but I think they're going to win Colorado. They're going to win Arizona. They're going to win North Carolina. They're going to win Montana. They might win Alaska. So there's a chance that they could get 51, but at least 50. The other races are a little hard to say. So, it's kind of a bit of a toss up, but I think there's a good chance that it could be in Democratic hands. I don't think that Texas will be in that list. I think that MJ Hager is a pretty good candidate, but not a great candidate. And only in comparison to the amount of money that Beto O'Rourke raised and his sort of just, the inspirational kind of strategy that they took, really pumping the ground for all kinds of votes in all kinds of places. And you see the effect of that in 2020, where, the turnout spiking in places where Democrats traditionally haven't done that well. So the echo effect of O'Rourke's success is really still there. But I think a lot of Texas Democrats don't know enough about MJ Hager. In fact, I don't know, some of you may have seen this debate last week on Friday night. Well, some of you may have been doing something more important on Friday night because, debates aren't like the most fun to watch, especially on a Friday. But there are still sizable chunks of the electorate that doesn't know enough about either candidate to make an informed decision. And when that's the case, incumbents are in good shape. John Cornyn has seen this coming for years, and they planned ahead pretty effectively. So I think he, frankly, steals one. I mean, this would be a race that in different conditions might be really competitive, but because the rest of the map is so competitive, I think a lot of money is flowing to those races instead of Texas, because again, Texas is an expensive place to run.
Right.
And on Texas state races, do you see changes coming there? What's your sort of overall picture of any state and local races that you want to highlight?
I mean, yeah, there are a bunch of races. I mean, so the Democrats, in case you're not aware, are basically 9 seats away from winning a majority in the Texas House, which they haven't had since 2000. That was the first year that Scrubs was on the air, right? And 24, Jack Bauer, any Jack Bauer fans out there, right? So it's been a long time, and Republicans have been just winning everything from top to bottom since then. Now we've seen some cracks in that, particularly because of suburban change as well as the demographic change we've been talking about. So there's a chance that Democrats could pick up the 9 seats or close to it that they need. They're definitely going to pick up at least 5. So, there's going to be some success, but exactly how high the blue wave will go will depend a little bit on how the vote at the top of the ticket flows, and also what happens sort of locally, right? So a lot of these changes in the election in counties may very well have an effect on these races. So it's going to be a little bit idiosyncratic, but I think Democrats are in position to pick up those seats in the House, as well as there's one Senate seat that they'll probably win too. That'll give the Democrats 18 in the Senate, which is not enough to do anything, but it's enough to stop things from happening. And playing defense can at least be a good political strategy for the time being.
Right. When you look at, for example, at the suburbs in especially, for example, Fort Bend County, you have a very interesting race on the District 28. That was a former district of Dr. Sherwas that decided to retire and take and go to work at UT Austin. But that's a race where the margin of victory of Republican candidates have decreased every 2 years, right? And that is in response to the demographic change. You see it also, in the 22nd congressional district of Pete Olson that is retiring as well. That's at the congressional level, but kind of local to a certain extent. You see that President Kulkarni has a significant advantage. And last time, 2 years ago, Pete Olson won re-election by 4 percentage points or something like that. So it has become more and more and more competitive. And also you have the Texas, right? A lot of Republican incumbents retiring and opening wide open those races to Democratic candidates and also new Republicans, that you have a lot of infighting within the Republican Party as well. So I think that, you know, those elections could have very important implications, because we are in 2020. The census is going to close either very soon or at the end of this month, depending on, well, the Supreme Court said that, you know, it's going to close like now. But still, if Democrats win the Texas House, then they're going to be controlling redistricting. And if that happens, well, we know what happens when a new political party is in place and they have redistricting at their hands. Something's going to happen.
So we just have about 2 minutes left. So I'll ask kind of a fun question as political scientists, right? When the chemists find a new something, they get super excited and it keeps them up at night. When the engineers create something, build a new way to build a bridge, they get super excited and it keeps them up at night. 2020 must just like be every day Christmas morning for you. You wake up every day and there's a new what moment, right? So what is the most exciting thing for you that surprised you in this particular cycle? And that you know, you have the regular polls and that gets your attention, or you have this, but what's the thing what's the hook that's been baited for you that you want to see how it turns out when it's all over for each of you?
For me, I think that it's about the death of political scandal. And I have outlining a project that explores this. If we don't consider malfeasance or people, you know, sexting or just generally, you know, bad behavior to be a problem anymore, then we definitely have lost something in this country. So I studied and have books on articles on political scandal, and it always mattered in some ways, but I'm not sure it does anymore. So we impeached the president and no one's even talking about this, right? It's not even a talking point in the campaign trail. So the death of scandal may be, to me, the most interesting thing about 2020.
For me is, I'm a data person. So for me is, you know, how political polarization and geography is intimately related. So every time that I do a new map, I'm fascinated by the new components that map is telling us. And also we have found with this new cycle, Brandon and I, we work on a lot of measuring distance from point A to the voting center and that kind of stuff. So also that brings me joy to the long hours of working with millions of observations and coming up with a map, and the data availability is just wonderful. So, I mean, tomorrow at 11:05, I'm going to have, well, maybe at noon, I'm going to have a new set of maps reviewing what happened today with early voting, right? So it's going to be something I'm always looking for that data every day. Like, okay, it's coming. And then
right. Exactly. And I think Dean O'Connor can put his video back on if he'd like. And if the president is there, she can also hop on if she'd like. But Jeff, I want to tell you that for you two guys, it must be like containing the kids before they get under the Christmas tree every day, right? I mean, just stay away. There's something new there. The excitement, and not in the hallways, because we're all been doing so much digital stuff. But the asset that you all are to the University of Houston is pretty incredible. And at this time and in this space, whether it's voting locations or analysis of the vote or Houston public media, and I know that I'm sure the president is wildly proud of this particular group, and how what an asset this is to Houston. President Couture and Dean O'Connor, I will send this to you. What this asset is to the city, and how proud you are of this group to stay neutral down the middle, but manage to give out the facts, which in this day and age is a small miracle. So thank you for that. If you want to add any final comments, I'll throw it to you all.
I am really proud, but I already knew how good they are. I mean, I already knew it, so it's not a surprise, but it does make me very proud.
Thank you so much. Yep.
Right, I second that they're excellent, and they do this. Brandon and Geronimo do this every week, and it's just an example. Again, as I said in my opening sort of remarks, is this is what a university can contribute to the public conversation, is to step back, use rational reasoning, evidence, facts, and hash things out. And that means you can respect all perspectives. But in the end of the day, we're providing information to the public that hopefully they find useful as they make decisions. And important ones like voting for our next generation of leaders.
Well, on behalf of all of our alums and everybody that watched today and everybody who will watch the recordings coming up, Jeff and Brandon and Geronimo, we want to thank you all so much for your time today. And thank everybody for joining us today. A couple of last reminders. The election is up and you can vote at the University of Houston. Voting early started today, obviously, but you can vote at the UH Student Center through October 30th. And then Election Day voting will be in TD-ECU Stadium. You can get that information on our website, houstonalumni.com, or on the university's website at UH.edu. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, for everybody who helped put this in our collaboration with the fantastic College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, which is really hard to say, which is why I say class every time. But I want to thank all of you for participating. Go out there and vote. Do what you can do to continue this great country moving forward. I want to thank all of our friends here, and on behalf of everybody at the University of Houston, like we always say at the end, go Cougs.